basically, when it all stemmed down to it, I was severely burnt out from the way that I had been operating. It's kind of the classic thing of like, like God's going to call until you pick up the phone. And so I had quite a few phone calls that I let go to voicemail. And so I had this moment where I was like, I think this is the sign. I had built this kind of like belief system and principles and habits and routines that were so flawed and that were so frankly unhealthy. And those were the things that allowed me to get 7 figures. So now became the tricky part, which was to say, okay, let's go to multiple 7. The only way I know to do that is with a flawed belief system, frankly, flawed values that I'm living by.
Welcome to another episode of The Rooted Founder. I am excited for this conversation today. I met Kate back in Montana at a George Bryant event, and I went there because I had woken up in my dream life, but it didn't feel like I thought it would. And so I was looking for a community that was soul-powered, but also very ambitious. And Kate was there, and she's a 7-figure founder and business consultant, and she blends the masculine and feminine principles to help women amplify their impact. And I love blending masculine and feminine because I think it's alpha and empathy, and it empowers us in very different ways. So I'm excited to have a conversation around her journey, how she integrates those into the businesses that she helps, and also just like who she had to become to achieve what she achieved. So Kate, I'm excited to have you here.
I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to dive in. I feel like when we connected in Montana, I was like, this is a girl that definitely is on the same wavelength. So I was like so excited to continue the conversation. We started there.
Yes. So let's get back to like when you were a little girl. And was there any inkling that you knew you were going to be an entrepreneur?
Definitely not. Being an entrepreneur was definitely not part of the vision at all. If I can be really honest and transparent, I think the first time I knew I was going to be an entrepreneur is the time that I went to like a business event. Actually, it was like the thing that changed it all for me. And being around other entrepreneurs made me realize like, okay, like this is actually something I'm really interested in, because I was kind of sold like classic 5-step blueprint to life, like go to school, go get a degree, go meet the guy of your dreams, have kids, like boom, 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 these classic milestones. And to be honest, because so many people in my surrounding had done that, I never really considered another alternative. And it was only once I went to that event that I started being surrounded by people who weren't part of that mindset that I then opened up to being, oh, okay, this might actually be something that I'm wanting to pursue. But to be honest, growing up when I was a kid, being an entrepreneur was considered extremely risky, not the path that you should be kind of exploring or curious about. And that if I wanted to have stability in the life for myself, that it was going to come from a 9-to-5.
Wow. Okay. So how did you revolt against the 5-step blueprint?
Yeah.
Or like have the courage to do it differently?
Yeah. I mean, I had gone to school for business and I thought that I wanted to be like in the business realm in some way. And I think truthfully at that time, I went into business thinking that if you're in business, you're going to be able to have the resources to make money. And so I was like, okay, like I'll stay in the business bucket. That's where I'm going to be able to have like the most lucrative, basically, career. And so going into that, like I'm very much, I would say like a creative. I'm not a math nerd by any means. So going into like economics and all of that was just like painfully boring for me. And I was like, I'm not into this. And I knew that I wanted to help women. I was raised by my mom who was a single mom of 4. And so seeing her navigate growing up with us and that whole dynamic, I really knew that I wanted to kind of like get more wealth, more resources really at its basic essence in the hands of women. And so I thought that I would do that through business, through going through school. And then I went through school and I was like, this doesn't feel like it clicks. So I went polar opposite side of the spectrum. I was like, I'm going to do social work. That's where I'm going to help women and like make the impact. And go into doing social work. I ended up working in the domestic violence kind of like section of things and working with women in that regard. But then I had this duality of like, I was helping women, but there was no money in social work. There's no funding in social work. So number one, you can't do much and there's not a lot of resources to do the things you want to do or the mission you have. And number two, it's not really a very lucrative career. And so I'm kind of back to square one being like, what do I do now? And so I had decided that I was going to stop the boxes and just kind of almost in a way allow life to tell me what was meant to be the next step, because I kind of was throwing away the milestones that I had been taught, and ended up going and getting a serving job with the mindset I was like, I'm just going to, basically save a bunch of money, travel, and find myself, if you will. And I saw an influencer that I had been following. She's an online business owner. And she was going to an event in Toronto. And I was like, I'm going to go to that event. Like, I'm going to see and get in that room. And I know they always talk about like getting in the room, but like truthfully, getting in that room changed my life. And being in the room, I knew growing up, like the blueprint was like, if you make 6 figures a year, like you made it. Like you've made this massive career in whatever sector it is. And if you do 6 figures a year, like you're good for life. You're set. You can kind of like, sit in that path now. And then being at an event and people are talking about making 100K a month and 200K a month and 300K a month. And I'm thinking like, in 30 days, like what are we talking? And it blew my mind, and it just opened up this level of awareness. And I realized at that moment, like I had seen the other side, and like someone opened the crack in the door. And I'm like, I can't unsee now. Like I can't go back to having that job that has the vision of like 6 figures as you made it, when I now know that there's other people out here making X amount in 30 days. And so that kind of like put the spark in me. And that was now 6+ years ago that happened. And so it's kind of been like since that moment that I was like, I have to pursue this. And it's just been a constant curiosity since that point.
So I can relate to so much of that. I volunteered at Safe Place, which is a domestic violence sexual assault rehab center, went through the trauma training, very much passionate about empowering women to be able to take control of their financial futures, but also their personal well-being and their inner freedom along the journey. I find it really fascinating, and I'm curious if you have an answer to this. So, in your head, you thought 6 figures was enough. And then it's like, wait, no, 7 figures. Oh, wait, no, people are doing eight figures.
Yes.
And blending like the masculine, feminine, like the hard charging, get it done, bigger, better, more. And then the part that like, I want to enjoy the journey. I want to show up for the people along the journey. How do you balance, blend, integrate those two?
Well, when I first started the business, I wanted 7 figures so bad. Like I had my eyes on nothing else. And I was like, I have to hit that target in a 12-month period. And once I do that, like I've quote unquote made it. Because exactly to your point, I switched the target of like, oh, people say 6 figures, I'm going to go for 7. But then I hit 7 and I remember it vividly. And I was so burnt out because I was just like work, ignore all the signs, all the symptoms. And what I mean by that is like body was fighting back, like awful acne, weight gain, digestive issues, issues with like, friendships that were kind of breaking down, relationship resistance. And I just was like, okay, like keep going. Because I truthfully also had this thing of people just don't understand. I'm just really ambitious. I'm really driven. People don't get it. And so I kept pushing and I hit 7 figures. And I remember it vividly because I was sitting on the couch, like in my sweatpants or pajamas kind of thing. So much dry shampoo in my hair. Probably at that point had only had coffee that day. And I was like, okay, so we made it. And like, I remember hitting the target and thinking like, so this is 7 figures, huh? Like, this is interesting. And I realized that the marker or the destination was always moving. And second, I had glamorized it so much in my head that it was so destination. And I completely ignored process and the journey. And so what I had realized was I had built this kind of like belief system and principles and habits and routines that were so flawed and that were so frankly unhealthy. And those were the things that allowed me to get 7 figures. So now became the tricky part, which was to say, okay, let's go to multiple 7. The only way I know to do that is with a flawed belief system, frankly, flawed values that I'm living by. So then it became really difficult because I was like, okay, well, how do I keep going? I guess I have to keep doing this to keep going to the next level. And for a period of time, I did that until my body like aggressively fought back to the point where like it wouldn't do anything. Like I couldn't think. My body was fighting me health-wise. I was sick nonstop. And basically, when it all stemmed down to it, I was severely burnt out from the way that I had been operating. And so it's kind of the classic thing of like, like God's going to call until you pick up the phone. And so I had quite a few phone calls that I let go to voicemail. And so I had this moment where I was like, I think this is the sign, because I had had moments of burnout, but I thought, oh, just have a nap, like have a weekend off and like just get back on it kind of thing. And, you know, to your question of like how to integrate it, I think it was difficult to do that. And it kind of only happened after I had the crisis because, and this at least on my standpoint, I'd love to hear what you think, is like for women, there's so few symbols of women soaring to the level of what there is for men. And so even when I got into the online business world, and it was like less than 2% of female founders hit 7 figures a year in revenue. And I heard that stat. And when I tell you that, I had anger like pulsing through my veins. And I was like, I have to change this. Like, this is not okay. And so then I think when I felt tired or when I felt resistance and I felt rest, I at that time associated that with weakness of being like, this is why it's 2%. Like, you got to keep going. You got to be different. You got to push through. And I thought at that time, the way to change it was to just work more. And what I had really not been considering is like, there's things that women experience in business that men don't, like cycles being one of them, where you just are completely debilitated for a week out of every month in the year. And so considering like the feminine for me was like an exploring thing of realizing I had this belief that doing business masculine was doing it the way guys do it. And so I had to really like unlearn that approach, because even with women that I coach and connect with who have kids, they have realities and daily lives that are so different than some of their male counterparts. And so I would say it's a constant work for me now, but it really, for me, integrating the feminine was rewriting, number one, what I define to be feminine. And number two, looking at really, for me, at its basic essence, making decisions from a value system, not from a goal.
My journey has been so similar. And when I hit 7 figures, I didn't even know I hit it. So my accountant calls me, sends me an email, congratulations. And I was like, oh, that wasn't even like a target I was shooting for. I was just so passionate about restoring dinner tables that I was just head down helping as many people as I possibly could. And then I realized my body was screaming at me. It was like, you can't keep operating like this. And I love what you said about our cycles, because I have a calendar that is called cycle syncing. And I map out the different phases that I'm going to experience in a month and block out the week that I'm not going to be the most productive or have the highest energy. And I use that week exclusively for reading and writing, because I can read in my sweatpants with all the dry shampoo in my hair or whatever I'm doing. And I can detox and flow and, do that. And then I come out and I'm super creative. And so I go into this massive creative phase. And then right after that creative phase, I get into massive productive phase. So I get in all my projects done, check all the boxes, and really feel empowered. And then I kind of do that all over again. And it's fluid, because sometimes it's 27 days, sometimes it's 28 days, sometimes it's 29 days. And I'm curious for you, you said one comment, which is you had to learn to define feminine differently. What have you defined it as for yourself?
Yeah, well, I think feminine to me, if I'm going to be really honest and transparent, I associated with like crystals. Like feminine to me, because I was so in my masculine, was very much a matter of, it was like when, and I hate to use this word because it really minimizes the work that it is, but at that time, it's what I associated it to be, which was like woo woo. Like I thought, I was like, it's too woo for me. It felt too intangible. There was no structure around the feminine. So it felt like I couldn't grasp it. And it felt too much of like a fleeting concept. So because of that, I was like, I'm not bought in. And then I had someone explain an analogy to me, which was like the masculine is like the coffee cup. It's the structure. It's what holds the frame. It's what basically contains all of it. And then you have the fluidity, which is the creativity, and the flow, which is the coffee inside. But like the coffee on its own without the structure is all over the table. The cup without coffee serves no purpose. And so that kind of analogy reframed things for me. And I think what really I now define feminine as is like the ability to be in flow and to be in a place where it's like a neutral, clear state. It doesn't feel pressure. It doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel like something that is confining. It feels like the ability to just, and I think the word that comes through is like intuition, this aspect of like the intuitive knowing what to do, honoring of like the intuitive of, do I need rest? Do I need to push a little bit more right now? And actually like listening, frankly, because I think masculine is quite a bit about the planning and the thinking. And I think feminine is a little bit more about the aspect of the feeling and the tuning in. And so I realized for me, the easiest way to distinguish it was the masculine is when I think about things and I'm strategizing about it. But then the feminine is like, okay, that's great that I think XYZ, but how do I feel about it? And just asking myself that question constantly allows me to tune in. And whether that's, in the context of personal, of like working out, like, do I want to go to the gym? Well, I think this about it, but it's like, how does my body feel? And tuning into it. I think the distinction for me is now a constant back and forth that I do in a practice of like thinking it, feeling it, thinking it, feeling it. Because I think also, at least in my consumption, feminine gets a really bad rap. And so does masculine in some regard. But I think feminine is very misunderstood. So I think because it's not as structured as the masculine, people kind of get to add whatever labels they want to it because it is a little bit more fluid, which is part, though, of why it makes it so great.
How do you like specifically do this in your life? So I'm thinking of, I heard Kim Kiyosaki say this at a conference I was at, how she decides with spirit, which is intuition, feeling, feminine, and then implements with logic, using the masculine structure, GSD mode to make it happen. And I've been playing with this a lot. Like, how much is too much feminine? How much is too much masculine? How much does my body enjoy the feminine more than it enjoys the masculine? How much of the masculine do I need to hold? Or how much can the masculine be held in with the men that are in my life? So I'm curious for you, like how you like on it, take one day. Let's take in one single day. You wake up in the morning and you go to bed at night. Like how in that day do you specifically do it?
Well, I think one of the things that instantly came through as you were saying that is like in the different buckets of your life, because I would actually argue I'm much more masculine in my business, but I'm much more feminine in my life. And as soon as I'm off the clock, it's like my personality swaps and I become on the total other side of things. So it was something actually I had to really work through because I was very much like, driving in the business. Like I was like, okay, like this is my show, my plan, my, steps. And even, for example, in relationship dynamics, allowing someone else to be in the masculine is still to this day very much a practice for myself because I think truthfully, I didn't really understand feminine until a relationship dynamic of what it meant to have someone drive. And I used to always associate that with power. Like if someone has the masculine structure or they drive, that's the power. And so I think for me, experiencing the feminine in that dynamic of someone else driving made me realize actually how calm my nervous system was. Like I was way more, I could sleep better. I was more rested. I felt more calm and I felt clear. And so for me in kind of assessing things day to day, if I feel charged by something in making a decision that like my logical brain says this is what we should do and my energy to it feels like really tense and charged, if it's not calm energy, it tells me that it's not actually something that is in quote unquote alignment. And so it's when something I can see as a logical structure of something I want to do that day, but then I check my energy to say like, does it feel heightened or does it feel like this is so calm and clear? Like, absolutely, let's do this. I actually only got an understanding of that feeling of what that meant because of a relationship. And so then when I took that to business, I was like, okay, in each moment, how do I hold that? And so I really look for how calm my nervous system is now as a sign of what is actually intuitively meant to be. Because usually for me, if there's emotions coming up around something where it's heightened, it tells me that there's actually something that's basically kind of competing inside of me, which means it hasn't settled yet. And so the flow to me is honoring that and recognizing that even though my brain says go, go, go on this thing, if my body is telling me there's a charge and a resistance to it, that's a sign that maybe it's not actually in alignment of what I'm supposed to do. So like in say like a day to day, definitely day to day, I would say the time where I'm in my masculine is without a doubt in the business hours. Because like if I like clock in, if you will, I then clock into my masculine through and through. And then when I'm done with business, the interesting thing is like, I actually don't like being in my masculine in my life was a big realization that I had. And I thought I did because, you know, obviously there's a lot of narratives for women around like the boss babe, this, that, or the other. And like, you know, you're just like a powerhouse in all aspects of it. But I realized that I was doing that not really from a place of actual intention or vision, but more from an aspect of scarcity because if I was going to be in my feminine, actually had to surrender to someone else or something else holding the masculine in that structure. And doing that was terrifying for me because it wasn't really about that I didn't want to be in the feminine. It was that I never found people like team members or, you know, relationships where I actually had someone I could fully embody and trust in the masculine. And it was only once I started to have those people around me that I could trust in the masculine that I surrendered into the feminine. And so I would say day to day, how I integrate it is I really notice and very conscious of buckets where I enjoy it versus don't. And then I also look at, is the thing I'm looking to achieve an actual logical problem to be solved? And so like even in business, I used to solve problems by like opening a Google Doc and kind of like planning it out. And now I've really realized when I've had issues or things that I'm trying to solve in business, I'm like, I need to go for a walk and get the heck away from the business to get clarity. And so like I went on a trip recently and we were just talking about this before we started recording. And I went on this trip, and prior to that, like I don't even know who I was prior to that, frankly. It was a complete like existential crisis for me almost, or a breakthrough, if you will. And it was because I'd never had enough peace to really be able to hear the purpose that was coming through. And so once I had that peace, I was like, oh. And so now I've taken that to kind of realize that like the silence and the stepping back is actually a lot of the time for most of the business problems I've solved where the biggest breakthroughs in clarity have come from now.
I echo all of that 100%. I feel like being masculine in the business is so enjoyable because it's achievement, it's high intensity, and it feeds that side of me. But then when I'm not in there, I don't want to decide what we're having for dinner. I don't want to decide what restaurant we're going to. I don't care. Like if you coordinate it all and you say, you know, we're going to dinner, we're taking the boat out, and then we're going to watch the sunset, and then we're going to come home. I am game. If you say we're going to a show, I'm game. Like I'm down for whatever, but I don't want to plan it. I don't want to decide it. I don't want to coordinate all of it.
Yeah.
So let's kind of switch gears a little bit into business, because I think what we're talking about is we're not abandoning our feminine in business either. We're still also bringing that along. And so we both coach clients, helping them to hit that 7-figure or beyond mark. You do it in sales and marketing and online media. I do it in operations. Mm-hmm. And I say you can't organize and scale your business unless you organize and scale yourself. Mm. And I feel like you bring that also into what you do. So I'm curious, how do you help women who are wanting to hit that 6-7-figure mark and in a lot of ways are in their own way to help them see how the path could unfold and who they have to become to make it happen?
Well, I think one of the first things that people often come in and they're like, okay, like strategy wise, like what's the plan? What should I do? And what's interesting is there's the aspect of like where you're going, which is vision, which a lot of, interestingly enough, masculine don't have. They have a step in front of them. They have the next 10 steps, but they really don't, they've never stepped into vision, because vision would actually have them thinking in a non-tangible way. Like it would have them thinking in more of the kind of like larger concept type of energy, frankly, the feminine of the vision of what you see for your life. And so it's interesting because a lot of the scaling people that come to me, oftentimes I'm like, okay, so where are we going? Like this number. And I'm like, but what if it's not the number? Like for your life, like what are we trying to achieve here? And so many people struggle to do that. And so one of the first things I'm looking at is like, what even is the North Star? And one thing that I have to be very conscious of, because I am very dominant masculine, I attract a lot of other women who are also extremely masculine. And so because I have this awareness now and I am able to call in this kind of client, it's actually so fun because I get to share a lot of the other side. And so when it comes to vision, one of the things that I really always focus on is like, how do you define success if you couldn't define it by a number? And so like, if you can't tell me like, oh, I want to get my company to here, usually it's this amount of revenue, profit, things that are very strategy, i.e. masculine oriented. I'll often ask, like, for example, for your family, what would success look like when your business gets to a certain size? Like 5 years from now, what does your family look like in connection to your business? What does your health look like in connection to your business? How do you feel in your business day to day in 5 years? And so I need to tap into the feeling side of it for them to even start to get the wheels turning of like, why am I doing this outside of a number, which most women in their masculine have not even thought about, frankly. And then the thing that I do to kind of bridge the gap to getting there is really looking at like the beliefs that they have, number one, but then also looking at how those beliefs are shaped from a value system. Because I realize that over time, a lot of people are acting the way that they're acting or taking actions in accordance with a belief system they're not even conscious of. And so then when you look at, okay, well, like I value my health, and I'm like, interesting, when you don't eat all day and you only drink coffee, right? It's like they say consciously that they value XYZ, but yet all their behavior is different. And so I often talk to clients about the fact, like, show me what you're doing and I'll show you who you'll be. It's like if you think about saying to somebody, I want to get healthy, but you see them doing all the most unhealthy behaviors, the actions are not in accordance with the goal that you're going toward. So one of the first audits that I do for anybody scaling is number one, tuning into vision of like what you tell me your North Star is in a way that's not logistical, and tuning into that before we get into strategy, but then asking to fill the gap. What is your belief system and your values? I get a snapshot of their current state of what they say they are. And then I have them walk me through like a week, a month, a quarter of what they've been seeing with their business, with their team in the day to day. And oftentimes there's this like stark contrast of like, I say I want this, but I actually am doing this. And it goes back to, that quote that even was shared at the event, which was that you don't have the business you want because you haven't become the person to run it yet. And that quote was kind of indirectly passed along to me years ago when I had wanted to hit 7 figures for the first time, because my coach had said to me, you don't deserve it. And I was like, how is that? And I was so mad because it was a male coach. So I was like, you don't understand the stat. And I was so upset. And I remember because he was saying like, you don't embody the values you need to have to be the business owner you need to be. And it had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with like, how was I maintaining my energy? What was my emotional regulating system? So, women will often joke about, I'm upset, like I'm grabbing a glass of wine. And even though we make light of it, realizing like, okay, well, like this is like a culture we're creating, a response, an energy reality that we're making normal. And so I kind of have to tune in with clients to see how are they honoring their feminine, and also with that, how are they potentially suppressing it and making that kind of part of this like lighthearted thing of running their business, when really it's this habit and pattern that has a compound effect that's going to lead them ultimately in a completely different place than they want to be.
This is like every human's journey. It's not just the 6-7 figure woman. The man does it too.
Mm-hmm.
It's every person's journey. It's that I want X. I want the 7-8 figure business. And the way I want to get there, I want to dictate. And I want it to be able to have my wine and abuse my body and not follow through on commitments and still achieve it.
Yeah.
And that is like the brutal awakening every human being has to go through, is we have to become the type of person to run it. So this will come back to you and I. Along your journey to hitting 7 figures, what internal hurdle? I mean, obviously you hit this hurdle also, but there's like a little bit of that dark night of the soul or that breakdown to break through that I think everyone has to soldier alone. I don't think that's something you can delegate. I don't think you can gift somebody consciousness or gift them awareness. Maybe we can create an environment. Maybe we can create frameworks. We can create experiences and facilitate it. But for maybe people who are hitting that in their life right now, what did it feel like for you? And who walked that path with you that you know that if they had not walked, maybe you wouldn't be where you're at?
Mm. Well, I would say like I had a couple of those in the last, call it like 6 years, because as I said, I had a lot of phone calls that I didn't pick up the phone for. So each time I had, different people who were in my kind of like ecosystem, my support system, who were all saying the exact same thing. Like, you got to stop. You got to change your behavior. You got to go a different way. Like, this is not sustainable. And there was a lot of messaging. And as I said earlier, I thought a lot of people just like didn't get it. And I was like, I got to keep going. I got to keep pushing. And I so agree with you, because I think that it's interesting when people try to like schedule a breakthrough, right? Like, you're like, okay, like this is the moment that I'm going to have a breakthrough. And I'm like, that's definitely not how it's going to work. It's going to be at the time, typically when you least expect it. I think that though there are, even with the event, you had shared something at the event as a breakthrough, and that led to a breakthrough for me. And then I came home from the event and took even further action from that, and, had even further breakthroughs in domino and all these things into my life that were all started with your share and kind of witnessing you in your breakthrough. And as to your point, what I realized was like, none of that's possible without putting yourself in environments of the conversations and the people, most importantly, who are open to challenging you. And I think that that's what I've realized, is that sometimes staying stagnant in this like stuck period is oftentimes because you sometimes can be surrounded by people who allow you to stay there because they're comfortable for you to stay there. They're okay. Whether it's your team, they're like, okay, she's good in this bucket because that serves us, or friends or family or partners or whoever it may be. And so I think for me, it's really looking at how you can put yourself in as many environments as possible to kind of create that catalyst for change, or at least open up yourself to an environment for it. But the thing, as both of us have experienced, it's not scheduled. It's not something that you can say, like, I need to have this breakthrough now to be able to move forward. And frankly, most of the things that I have had as like the biggest catalyst moments for my journey happened when I was not planning, when I was not in the like, I need to have this clarity point. And so when I have the breakthrough, or I have, the breakdown, ideally is the main way that people discuss it, but it's really ideally the breakdown without the breakdown, the breakthrough without the breakdown. When you have that moment, the low period and getting through that, I think the past me really avoided the feeling. Like, I was like, I don't want to feel this. I have too much to do. I'm too busy. I don't have time for this right now. And I would constantly push. And so what ended up happening was those feelings came up when I wasn't ready. I'd be crying randomly and emotional in a setting that made no sense. And I would be in a conversation with someone, I would feel really triggered in a way that made no sense. And what I'd realized was you have to create consistent pathways for yourself to tune into that. Maybe it's an event, but it can also be on your own. And I don't know about you, but I feel like for me, a lot of my breakthroughs have been a very lonely process, because it feels like no one gets it. It feels like you're in it by yourself. And I find that when you're surrounded only by the right people, and this is why I think the people you surround yourself with is just so immensely important. Because if you're in a breakthrough and you're having this deep moment, and you're surrounded by people who don't have the capacity, tools, or awareness, to your point, to hold space for you, it actually can make you further in your breakdown, further go down the path of where you're actually trying to avoid. But then even, for example, witnessing you in the room and the way in which you communicate and the way in which you share was something that, because of who you are, allowed a domino for other people. And so it was because of the type of people that you're around, not just being around people, i.e. just because someone's friends or family and they can like be there to kind of be in it with you, doesn't necessarily mean that they're actually being a support in the breakthrough. And that was a big, difficult lesson I had to learn, which was just because someone loves you and cares about you while you're going through this transition or clarity point doesn't mean they have the level of consciousness or awareness to be able to support you in getting through it. And so I think processing on your own initially is good to get your own clarity point before you let inside influence come in. But then when you're ready at a place where you're like, okay, like I'm ready and open to this, i.e., I can receive the advice or the insight, making sure that you're super conscious about who those people are. Because without that, you can actually sit further, which happened to me a couple times, to sit further in my routine because the advice I was taking in was from someone who didn't have the consciousness or the awareness to really understand what I was experiencing.
Yes. All of that. I think what we're talking about too is in some of your podcasts, you've talked about this, like having an agenda, doing something for an agenda. And in a way, what we're describing is we did that to ourselves. We made ourselves do something for an agenda. We agendized ourselves, and then we became so disconnected from our own intuition and our own feeling. And then we went back to the same environments and places to try to have a breakthrough, but it just reinforced the same belief system that was causing the breakdown.
Yes.
And then we had to go get into a new bucket. And the whole evolution of what happened at the event that we were both at was I was able to actually open up in the way that I did because George was able to hold the container the way he did. And so it was like this whole yes. He had this ripple effect of it. And I have been committed to personal development and growth since I was very young. I've read thousands and thousands and thousands of books, gone to hundreds of seminars and workshops. I have probably over 100, 200 journals that I have completed myself, like just self-reflection. And I think your point is very valid. I have been so blessed to have different running mates at different times in my life, but it's few and far between. There are many seasons in my life where people could not walk it with me. And not because they didn't want to, not because they didn't care, not because they weren't showing up. They were showing up. They were just showing up in the capacity that they were able to meet me at. And they couldn't see me in the way that I needed to be seen because they hadn't yet seen and held themselves in the way that they needed to be seen and held. And I think the longer you're on this journey, the smaller that group gets. And I feel so blessed that we all met because I'm like, okay, I've got another tribe of people that are on this journey and can see where I'm at and what I'm going through and where I'm headed. And not only do you want to be a running mate with me, but you're actually running your own race too. And so you're softening and you're opening up and you're reflecting. And then that gives the permission slip for all of us to continue down this path without shame, with an abundance of grace and hard truths. I was on a phone call yesterday. One of my girlfriends, she called me and I started venting about something. And she goes, okay, I'm going to hold up the mirror. How are you doing this in this situation? I was like, yes, thank you. Like, that's what I want. I don't need a kumbaya, pat me on the back and tell me that, oh, let's all feel good about it. Like, tell me how I am contributing and enabling this environment.
Yeah, I mean, I have a rule with someone in my life that we always like kind of challenge each other on things. And we have a 30-second rule, which is like, you get 30 seconds to vent, to just like be in your suck if you need to be. Like, I hate this. I'm so annoyed at this. I'm so annoyed at this. But after that moment, if I'm seeing patterns and I'm seeing things that you're doing, I'm like, hey, tough love. I'm going to be direct with you. And that's because I think sometimes we associate like support system as support us in the way in which we want to be supported, i.e., if I want to stay in my story, I want people who let me stay in that. And I actually will say that now my support system is actually the level of quality is the level of intensity that you're willing to call me on my stuff. How consistent will you be on being like, hey, tough love? And I'm like, oh, here we go. But you have to realize that that's also like, even your friend doing that for you is that shows the level and the depth of love that she has for you, that she won't let you stay there. And so I think as entrepreneurs, it's tricky because you're surrounded by friends and family. And if you don't have a network of other people who are like-minded, similar goals, similar values, similar beliefs, you can, exactly to your point, have a breakdown go to then go back to that exact environment that it happened or that kind of created it, and then try to find in that exact same environment the clarity to change it. When really, I think the idea of like separating yourself from the environment is really a matter of getting exposed to new information and new insights. And so the one blessing I think that there is in entrepreneurship is the fact that there's such easy opportunity to really, as you said, create your tribe, create your people. And they're your panel of judges, if you will, that allow you to really challenge yourself to the next level. And for me, I realized when I started to have friends like that in you know, the business world, who've become frankly like some of my best friends more than anyone else I've ever met in my life. I think the reason we were able to go so deep so quickly is because they were like, hey, I love you, but also, and would go into the other ways in which whatever I was doing wasn't serving me. But I think the only way that someone can do that is if they themselves, as to your point, also challenge themselves to do that. If someone has lived their entire life or is in a pattern of their life where they're constantly in their story, they're the last person who's going to challenge you because they don't look at themselves that way. So because they stay stuck, they want you to stay stuck. And now we're in this great cycle of all of us being stagnant. So I think the one plus of entrepreneurs is because we're typically so self-aware. And as to your point, we're so interested in being like, okay, like where can I unlock new parts of myself? Because we're so interested in that, you're constantly surrounded by people who have deep levels of awareness. And because that challenge you to also tap into it as well.
I feel like in business, sometimes it's getting the visionary and integrator relationship right. Because as a visionary, we can be so creative, outward focused, and operate in this, I'll do whatever it takes to achieve my vision. And then whoever you choose as your integrator, you have to deeply trust. And they have to be able, to your point, call you out on your BS and it not threaten the container of the relationship, and it not threaten the business, and it not threaten your friendship and the trust that you've built between each other, and it be an opportunity to bring in more trust. We call it having a pink elephant conversation. Like everyone knows a pink elephant is in the business right now, and we're going to sit down and have the pink elephant conversation.
I love it. I love it.
Sometimes you need a mediator though, because you can't always do it yourself.
Yeah, true. Very true.
So as we're wrapping up here, I have a few final questions. One of which is, as you've been along this journey and you have full permission to change your life, your mind in the future, but what do you want to most be known for?
Good one. That's a good question. I think the ability for women to choose, like even today's conversation, I was so excited about, because I think, you know, with the masculine feminine, there's been this kind of, which is why I love the motto of what your brand and your business stands for. Cause I'm just like, yes, like when I heard you talk about this at the event, I was like, it just, my heart started going, because I think that women have had this idea of what their role looks like. And I think that that's changing rapidly, whether you're an entrepreneur or not. And my biggest thing is giving women the ability to choose, because I think there was this aspect of women were the homemakers, and we had that phase. And then we had women in the workplace, and, you know, getting women to the workplace and all of that came with it. And women have just been under this almost like identity crisis in a way of like, what is our role? And like, do we want masculine men? Like, are we the masculine men? Like trying to figure out what the dynamic is. And I think that most more than anything, I think it's the ability for women to choose, and for there to not be this pressure of there being a right or wrong as an entrepreneur, whether you're more masculine, more feminine, or if your role looks this way or that way. And in allowing them to choose, giving them the resources to, with that choice, still be independent and have full ability to have opportunities and resources that they need for the life that they want. And so for some people, that's going to be business, but it's also sometimes, you know, for me, it might be like a podcast where it hits home for someone and it changes, you know, their thought on something they're experiencing in their personal life, and that has a domino. I think it's giving women, mainly, if I could distill it down, the ability to understand the masculine and feminine and be able to take that clarity and awareness and integrate it in as many parts and portions of their life as possible.
Well, I look forward to doing that crusade with you. I value choice so much. I wrote a book called Unstoppable Me in 2016, and the motto or the tagline was courage, choice, habits. Because in order to choose something different, we have to have courage to say, the way I've been operating, the way I've been doing it, the way the world, the masculine feminine dynamic has been working is not working. And we have to do something different. And that takes so much courage and also a massive leap of faith, because you don't know where it's going to lead to. And then once you get to the point of choice, you have to grieve the loss of some things that you are not going to carry with you onto this next phase of your journey. And that be okay, because it's going to be replaced with some more beautiful things that you don't even know might be coming. And then to your point earlier about when you work with clients and you come in and you see, like, I value my health, but then their calendar is showing that they're drinking coffee and not eating. Like, we have to integrate it into what we do on a day-to-day basis. And I think a lot of women want this too. They want to be able to have agency and have their energy be aligned with what they do. And I think it's very possible. And I think we're in the process of doing this, even in our own businesses, in our own homes, and in our own lives, and sharing the journey. And even that part can be a little scary, you know, talking about all the inner cobwebs that are like,
Absolutely, because it's so messy. It's so messy. It's not something that feels clear. Like when women were the homemaker and then the male was the provider, and this is what it looks like. It was so structured that everyone felt like they had this like American dream blueprint. It's like, okay, like that's success, got it. And like we all understood the vision, we understood what it looked like. And so I think even back to kind of like, you know, your dinner table motto of the brand, like I think like that just instantly light bulb for me when I heard you share that, because I think it's so needed. There's just such a lack of clarity of what that can look like for people. And I think because there's no education around it, there's disempowered people around it, in the sense of like people don't feel empowered on how to navigate it because there's no information on how to navigate it. It's one of two sides. You're either, again, like in the old kind of like more traditional approach, or full contrast, you're like the independent boss babe provider. And it's like, what if there was a middle? Like, what if there was a way for women to kind of, exactly like you're saying, like be the masculine in business, but not the masculine at home? And like, what could that look like? And how do those dynamics work? And so I think even the conversations that you're having are like part of the first step, frankly, of opening up the conversation so other women can feel seen to share. And even hearing you share that at the event, frankly, was the first time I've ever heard anybody talk about that, because most women are scared to share it because they feel like they're going against the feminine movement by doing so. It's like, we just worked so hard to be like boss babe. And then you're saying, wait, maybe I don't want the boss babe thing, or like maybe I only want it in certain buckets. And so I think by having women like you who are starting to have that conversation, it opens up the discussion for other people to say, oh, actually, I've been just like basically me. I've been feeling the exact same way behind the scenes. Here's what I think about that. And it opened up such a beautiful conversation. So like, I think it's the first step, but there's definitely like a lot more work and a lot more time that it will take to really get some clarity on like exactly what it looks like.
Well, when we're pioneering a new path, the path is not paved yet. And so, of course, it's not going to be super clear, and we get to just pioneer it and rally people who feel the way we feel. Because honestly, that was the first time I had shared. I haven't even shared it on the podcast. So I guess I'll move now.
Okay.
That Kate,
okay. I didn't know that.
No, I love it. I will do maybe an episode where I talk about my dream, my passion, about how committed I am to restoring dinner tables, and my visionary moments about what I want that to look like. Yes. But yes, I do. I think dinner tables need it. And I love that it has resonated so well with everybody there. And how we can integrate. It's not either or. It's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's not being extreme, but it's really an integration process where we're all multifaceted and we can be multiple versions of ourselves. Like sometimes I want to be hard charging and sometimes I want to garden and make sourdough. Like I can be both.
Yeah. Yeah. But there's no conversations of the and. There's only conversations of the or. Like it's like, do you want to be this, or do you want to be like that high power charging woman? And it's like the thing that I felt when I heard you share that at the event was like, I felt like indirectly what I took from it was you're like, what about both? And I was like, what? Like, cause I was like, I've never heard somebody open up that permission slip for people to say, what would it look like in the white and black conversation we're having of these two sides. What if we were like to play in the gray? What about that? And I was like, interesting. And you start to consider, what does that look like? And there's not a lot of conversation around it. So like, I so agree. I think it's inspiring and absolutely something that I resonated with. Absolutely.
I love hearing that. So what projects are you super excited about that are coming up for you?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, for me, same thing, podcast, just being able to give as much value as possible. And I think in the sense of projects, one of the things that we really have just been focusing on is trying to honestly connect women with other women, whether that's through online platforms, programs, all that stuff, or retreats, or honestly, just even for myself, one of the big things for me has just been going to events and being able to connect with other people who are like-minded. Like I, at least for me, feel like since COVID, everyone has been really desiring like true connection. Like in person, there's just no comparison. Like online is beautiful and it's amazing how many people you can connect with. But I think also connecting with people in person at things like events, you just can't put a price tag on it. It's just so different. And the way that I explain it to people is like, imagine only seeing your mom on FaceTime for the rest of your life. You only see your mom on FaceTime. And it's like, or you only see your dad on FaceTime. And so it's, yeah, obviously great to be able to see them, but there's no comparison to when you see them in person. The same thing is true for business. It's like, if you really want to create those deep connections with people, the in-person is where to do it. And so I think for me, like one of the biggest things that we're working on is just trying to see how we can create even more opportunities for people to connect like that, whether it is in a virtual setting or in person.
I love that. In person is everything because you can feel energy.
Everything.
I mean, we can feel each other's energy here, but there's so much that organically transpires when you're in a room, and you also, things that aren't said, you can pick up on and double tap on. And then that forms that intimacy that you're really looking for. Otherwise, you know, with AI now, I could maybe even not even be talking to you right now.
You're absolutely right with the what's not happening is also being there, because when you're able to see what someone is having as a breakthrough in a room and they're sharing something, there's also the moments when they're not sharing. There's the moments of like they're fidgeting, which you can't see on Zoom, or that you can tell like they're uneasy and they're kind of like moving their body. There's so much about body language that tells us about how someone's processing or sharing. And so I think while Zoom is amazing, there's a lot of breakthroughs that can happen in a virtual world. There's just an aspect of being, and I think the only way to describe it is like being seen. You cannot hide when you're in person. And I think that, to me, people often are like, well, can't it be done virtually? I'm like, yes, but the thing is, you've been hiding this entire time. Like the reason you are like, oh, do I need to do in person is because you're comfortable in hiding, which is even more reason why you need to go. Because it's actually the first time where at least I feel like you're fully seen, which is almost why like I am addicted to events. Like I'm like, I want to be seen. I want to be witnessed again, because I can feel myself at moments hiding and therefore ultimately like hindering my own breakthroughs that I know I need to have. So anytime I have the opportunity, I'm like in person, always, always.
Well, I can't wait to be in person with y'all again. Especially the intimate ones. It's so nice. It's so fun. If people want to connect with you virtually until they come in person, how might they find you?
So we have a podcast called Ambitious. So that would be somewhere that you're going to be able to listen to me in your headphones for an hour at a time. And other than that, it would be Kate Perkovic on social, on basically any platform. But yeah, like I obviously would always be happy to connect with you guys. Absolutely.
Well, it was so good having you on, and I have enjoyed just the short experience of us getting to know each other and the container of integrating the masculine and the feminine, and learning how to make it be both. I feel like this is a crusade that we can share, and also our heart being so similar, like social work and wanting to do it for free, but also, hey, let's put some money behind this. I love it. So thank you for being on.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for having me.
Yes. And for everyone who's listening, remember that you can stay rooted as a leader, founder, and also get shit done. It's where the dreamer and the doer have to meet so that you can create the life that you want. So we are rooting for you, and we look forward to having you tune in on the next one. Cheers, y'all.